So, if you don't think this, then you are definitely some kind of agent, or even not just an agent, but specifically a traitor.
So it was already said, traitor, hysterical, agitated, hysterics, I don't even know. So why don't you go back to the kitchen? Why aren't you raising your children?
Today, a battery is not just a component. It's much more than that. It's politics and economics. In other words, power. The world is racing to see who will control the energy of the future. Global battery manufacturing today unfolds under China's and South Korea's dominance, the EU's strategic objectives, and the challenges of the global green transition. The competition is not only technological, but geopolitical as well. In the race for the world's new energy sources, the battery is drawing new axes of power. And in this struggle, not only technologies collide, but ideologies too. In our film, we show how battery manufacturing is taking place in Europe today, what challenges Hungary and Sweden are facing, and what changes should be made for a greener and more sustainable future. Road transport produces nearly 1/5 of Europe's CO2 emissions. To reach climate neutrality by 2050, electric vehicles are essential. At their core lies the battery, the most advanced and costly component, up to half of total price. In today's geopolitical landscape, domestic battery production is not just industry, it is strategy. By 2024, the EU had 209 gigawatt-hours of cell capacity, concentrated in 5 states: Poland, Hungary, Germany, France, and, before Northvolt's collapse, Sweden. European firms still account for only a small share. By 2030, planned capacity will grow 5-fold to over 1,125 gigawatt-hours, with 1/3 led by European producers. Germany's strength rests on industry, yet supply depends on foreign firms like CATL and Russian gas. Still, Germany hosts the largest IPCEI projects and invests in upstream innovation, positioning itself for future upgrading. Poland's sector is dominated by LG Energy Solution. While avoiding Chinese cell investment, Chinese firms supply key materials. With no domestic champions, Poland remains foreign-controlled. France blends domestic and foreign investment. Prologium's Taiwanese plant in Dunkirk comes with technology sharing, while ACC and Verkor anchor Battery Valley, driving jobs and reindustrialization. Chinese players are present, but balanced by local capacity. Sweden built its strategy on Northvolt. Its 2024 bankruptcy revealed Europe's fragility against subsidized Asian rivals. Sweden retains strong R&D and renewable energy, but the collapse left a gap and a lesson. Autonomy needs patient capital and secure agreements, not just ambition. Hungary holds the EU's largest pipeline, over 1/5 of planned capacity. Yet, the model brings little domestic upgrading. The industry is resource-intensive, weakly regulated, and faces growing public opposition.
We have to be clear-eyed about the risks we face. Take the electric vehicle sector. It is a crucial industry for the clean economy with a huge potential in Europe. But global markets are now flooded with cheaper Chinese electric cars.
In 2019, the EU announced its Green Transition Program, the Green Deal, which means that after 2035, cars with internal combustion engines may no longer be sold. Some member states are making good use of this European greening wave, while others are abusing it.
So it seems that the European car manufacturers have indeed fallen behind in this regard, and the EU is facing a dilemma here. how individual countries shape their own industries is left to the countries, that is, to the governments. Moreover, the European Union cannot say that it is, so to speak, against battery manufacturing, since it is a goal for the green transition and greening, and the EU also supports the battery industry.
Overall, we see a strong trend towards electromobility. There is no denying that fairly soon we're all gonna drive electric. Where would those batteries needed come from? And of course, we see within the European Union context that we're increasingly worried that a large part of the value chain is not controlled by us. How much more can we do ourselves? Which also leads us to not in my backyard. So you will see in Hungary and Sweden and elsewhere, people saying, I would love for this to not be Chinese, for instance. I would love for it to be European, just not here.
There are many contradictions in the European battery strategy. Europe is on an absolute forced path. So the thing is that East Asian manufacturers have roughly a 2-decade advantage in this technology. The tables have turned. Now they are in the lead and we are trailing behind them.
Hungary, under the Orbán government, has chosen a separate path in battery manufacturing as well. In the hope of economic growth, the country's doors have been flung wide open to Chinese and South Korean factories, while environmental destruction and people's protests are being ignored.
Magyarországon gombamódra szaporodnak a rendkívül energiaigényes akkumulátorgyárak, ami aggodalommal tölti el az energetikai szakembereket.
A tervezett 50 akkumulátorgyár az ország szinte minden régióját lefedi. Nem csak a várható felhajtott energiaárakat kell majd megfizetni, már most is az adófizetők pénze áll ezekben a beruházásokban.
It should be noted that the battery factory, which is a hazardous operation, even if there might be some parts that are not classified as such, they work with dangerous materials, flammable substances, and carcinogens. I believe that the price of the green transition should not be paid with our health.
From a union perspective, from the very first moment, we saw, knowing the government's previous behavior, that they had decided this, so it will happen. The question is, and we prepared for this, that those investments being realized in Hungary, what kind of working conditions they will provide for the workers.
Ez a beruházás megnöveli Magyarország szerepét az európai elektromos autóipari átállásban.
Hatalmas akkumulátor beruházásokat csinálunk Magyarországon, és mi leszünk pillanatokon belül a világ harmadik legnagyobb, nem százalékban, abszolút értékben, harmadik legnagyobb akkumulátorgyártója.
Is this profitable, or is it effective, or is it perhaps that the Orbán government is losing ground in the battery industry?
Here, I would like to start from what the goal of all this is. So the fact that we have become a battery superpower, so this is already in the past. This really, Viktor Orbán also promised this. He kept this promise. Hungary is truly a leader in this industry. What purpose does this serve? Who benefits from this? There is greening, there is economic development, there is geopolitics. As an analyst, I must add that we do not know what purpose serves the Hungarian battery policy. I think it's very important to state this. This is not a transparent system and not a democratic system. So not only does the government not say what it wants, but it also tries to make it impossible for those civilians and journalists who try to monitor it.
But this is where we start, and then we can try to deduce from their actions what the goal might be here.
We can rule out the green goal first, and then there's economic development, which I think is already a more difficult question. So what these companies bring are jobs. So while this can also be debated about for whom and how, in Hungary there is already a labor shortage. So it's interesting that they set this goal. And then there is this geopolitics, which I think is the solution. So what Viktor Orbán is trying to do is this geopolitical positioning, this bridge role of connectivity between East and West, which is often discussed. So They say that this connectivity, this bridge role is so important in a world becoming more divided. But what they are doing is not a bridge role. In reality, they are just doubling the vulnerability. So we continue to depend on the German automotive industry, and now we also depend on someone else.
Initially, in the first round, respiratory diseases will most likely increase. Secondly, in the long run, the cancer diseases. This is also contributed by low participation in screenings. So I can say that the number of avoidable deaths will increase, that's for sure.
There are attempts at battery manufacturing even where democratic safeguards are much stronger than in Hungary. This technology can indeed be the green answer to the challenges of the future, but only if we do it right. For example, like the Swedes. Although the Swedish Northvolt plant has already gone bankrupt, the way that story began is exemplary for the entire European community. Consultations were continuous, and from the very start, the project was characterized by social dialogue and transparency.
It's very deciding and difficult days right now, because if the wrong not in my backyard perspective is allowed to win, where people are like, yeah, I'd rather not have that kind of factories around my house, I'd rather just drive with imported fossil fuels, then the whole green transition can very easily come to a halt here in Sweden.
If I could mention the case of Northvolt in Sweden as an example, where the Northvolt investment proceeded by announcing that they wanted to build a factory, and then about 40 locations competed to have the factory there, and it was the place called Skellefteå where the factory was eventually built. There they planned for a year involving the water management, the electricity provider, the local government, and everyone on what will happen, where the workers' accommodations will be built, where the pipelines will go. So it was a collaborative effort, and they submitted this plan to Northvolt. And then when Northvolt chose them, practically everyone was happy, so they considered it a joint success.
I see that in the Nordic countries, this kind of model, it predicts or shows long-term future for every single citizen and guest worker there. So it provides a kind of security now, not economic, because obviously the economy often forces businesses to take steps that the unions do not always agree with. This kind of social value, which concerns social dialogue and consultation, can be used to build a future.
Northvolt was about to become Europe's largest battery manufacturing in the north of Sweden. Now, Northvolt had one issue. Hardly any of the battery know-how was found locally in Sweden. That also made them vulnerable. And then we were hit by a recession. We were hit by COVID, as we all remember. And we were also hit by a particularly disappointing strain of Not in My Backyard. In this particular case was also part of the alt-right, if you want, the extreme right parties of Sweden.
Where democratic oversight is weak, investments may be fast, but they are opaque and often destructive in every sense of the word. The factory's water consumption is of a magnitude that defies human comprehension. Workers' fainting spells and inadequate occupational safety conditions do not help win social acceptance for battery manufacturing.
Nem kell politika, csak ne legyen ennyi akkumulátorgyár. 28-at terveznek, ez nagyon sok egy ekkora kicsi ország.
The problem was that generally when a government develops an industry, let's say a significantly new industry elsewhere in Western Europe, they usually plan it responsibly for several months, consulting with various organizations. This did not happen here in Hungary, so the Hungarian government did not set conditions for, let's say, the Chinese investors, so it did not require that there be a certain number of Hungarian jobs or Hungarian suppliers, but practically the Chinese manufacturers, like an island, like a little China, are producing Chinese products here in Hungary.
This certain fetus damaging solvent, which battery factories use in large quantities, this is N-methyl-2-pyrrolidone. The name of this was already known to the people of Göd because the local civil association, the Gödert Association, had already conducted a water sample test from a well there in 22, and it was revealed that this NMP appears and is detectable in the well water.
A Samsung megjelent az utcánkban, az udvarunkon, aztán a házunkban, a nappalinkban, és még a hálószobánkban is természetesen.
Minden próbálkozásunk jóformán eredménytelen, mert minden, amit tesznek, az a Samsungnak kedvez.
Why is it important to have a European domestic battery industry? Is this important at all? Because we can import these batteries. That's also an option. And I think yes, I think this is a very important and legitimate goal. And a continent simply needs to understand this. This knowledge cannot all be in China because then all the related skills, all the related development will also only be in China. So yes, looking at the market, I really see that this is an absolutely future-proof technology, but let's make it clear that if only the assembly plant is here, we won't achieve this goal. So the key is really that the knowledge is here. I think catching up is possible, mainly because Europe is one of the world's, if not the most developed industrial regions. So here the situation looks different than with the rise of East Asia. So this knowledge, when it flows in, can fall on very fertile ground when there are well-trained professionals, engineers, and those networks or ecosystems into which it can channel. So if anyone, then Europe, of course, can catch up. A lot of money and a lot of time.
What did they promise? So what did they promise to those companies coming to Hungary? Do Hungarian laws prevail within the fence or anything else? There is a serious problem here. In the previous period, we experienced at several companies that, well, this is not what they promised us, said various company leaders when we pointed out that, well, employees do have rest time, overtime is limited, and so on and so on. So these are all questions that are not linked to the industry, but to the quality of the investment and the culture bringing the investment in.
If there is a system that strongly emphasizes sovereignty, what they do with these investments is precisely to loosen the state. So what happens here is that these projects arrive and the state says that it would loosen regulations, labor law, environmental regulations, and that's how they arrived here. This clearly undermines sovereignty.
Returning to heavy metals, they enter the body, do not get eliminated, and it is not by chance that they are called carcinogenic. So if they enter the body through prolonged exposure over a long period, they will eventually cause cancer. There are analyses about workplace averages, since those who work in these factories are directly exposed to this effect. See, first nasal mucosa, inflammation occurs, and then if it passes through, it can enter the brain, for example, where it deposits on. These factories are being set up here, and they will continuously emit this substance. And the question is how feasible it is to keep it in a closed system.
We are sitting here now in a playground. I think the battery factory is 200 meters away in a straight line. We are surrounded by residential properties. Do you think the people who live or play here are safe?
Well, they are not safe on their own because they have to be concerned not only about environmental pollution, but also about the risk of accidents. So this area where we are sitting now, this is the Gödöllő area. This is indeed within the disaster protection hazard zone. If the question is whether anything changes following a 100 million fine, then I am afraid not, because, for example, the fire safety and industrial safety fines were imposed in such a way that they received them every year for the same offense. The fire safety equipment was not properly installed. This is quite an absurd situation where there are certain official orders and the company does not comply with them. So we end up in a situation where practically the South Korean multinational dictates to the government and they obey. Samsung can do anything.
There's a drinking fountain on this playground. Would you dare to drink from it?
Not at all, but I wouldn't really drink from wells in Goethe because the wells haven't been fully tested.
In Mikberch, in the Hajdúság region, people have been protesting from the beginning, organizing resistance and asking their questions, yet the locals receive no substantive answers. Meanwhile, the factory is being built, practically in their backyard.
I see, and this is actually a very, very big danger in Hungary, that considering they try to solve everything by force and a single decision, the consequence of this is that local residents have been completely excluded from all information.
If you don't think this, then you must be some kind of agent, or even not just an agent, but specifically a traitor. So it has already been said that you're a traitor, hysterical, agitated hysterics. I don't even know why you don't just go back to the kitchen. Why aren't you raising your children? So some people can't handle it temporarily, while others say, okay, this is the limit for me. But beyond that, of course, I'll still help you with everything.
Battery manufacturing is the future. But what kind of future will it be? The question is not only who produces it, but also how, and at what price. Today, Hungary is the symbol of what the newest industrial revolution looks like, where democratic safeguards have been dismantled and a country at the heart of Europe has stepped onto the path of autocracy. The European Union must rise to the challenge and reconcile European values with the technology of the future.
If such a small country does not have the appropriate comparative advantage to establish such a large industry, then theoretically, according to textbooks, it is not justified to create it.
We have seen how a member state where power bears autocratic traits seeks to become Europe's frontrunner in the battery industry. We have also seen how very differently this works in a democratic state. Europe's path must be to adapt modern, green technology in a way that makes everyone a stakeholder and a partner.
Many European Union regulations would otherwise help the situation of workers. The question is how the current Hungarian government brings it home. How is the regulatory environment in Hungary created? But without avoiding the answer. I think it would be extremely important to look at good examples in terms of various occupational safety, occupational health, and labor law issues, and not cherry-pick from the regulations of individual nation states, those that are the employers, and in certain cases, the government are placed in a better position compared to the already quite weak position of employees.
Alapvetően szükséges. it is fundamentally necessary. Until this European Union regulation is in place, there is nothing to hold accountable, so to speak. This is how it can happen that materials classified as hazardous can be treated as non-hazardous, for example, during battery dismantling.
The legal foundation theoretically exists. Practically, I think that the fact that these could be built this way means exactly that the sieve is too porous. In China, the kind of forced industrialization we are seeing here, because I can only call it forced industrialization, resulted in cancer rivers and cancer villages. Do we have to wait for the same to happen here?
It's important to realize that sustainable mobility is part switch to electromobility. That's great. But in order to minimize the dependence on metals and minerals and on imports from maybe Congo, maybe China, we should also be much more about, and that should be integrated in the whole concept of sustainable mobility. We should be much more about efficiency. I think that should be the first question. How much can we make more efficient before we start switching from fossil to electromobility? Unless we start there, we're not going to be fully sustainable.
The EU is just trying to tighten regulations. So now, for example, new waste codes must be introduced at the member state level. The Hungarian state has also abused this. Until now, lithium-ion batteries were treated as non-hazardous waste in the category of other batteries and accumulators. And I think that the EU is on the right track in terms of tightening and specifying. The problem is more about how these member states implement this, especially in a state where there are 40 battery industry investments. There it poses very serious risks that I don't know how this could be indicated at the EU level, so I can only return to this. How is it even possible that such dangerous facilities are built near residential areas?
Of course, if you want to be relevant in the transition, you have to be leading in the transition. The European Union needs to get its act together fast, because if we wait much longer, it's too late.
The key to Europe's future is to set strict expectations in response to the legal, environmental, and social challenges of battery manufacturing, and to enforce compliance with these expectations everywhere. Only in this way can the European Union be competitive in the long term in the green transition.